No one expected fireworks that morning. It was supposed to be a standard Senate Oversight Committee hearing on federal ethics reform. Cameras were rolling, staffers were half awake, and most lawmakers were rehearsing talking points. Pam Bondi, sitting confidently at the center of the witness table, had already testified for over an hour without much disruption. But then Senator Lindsey Graham leaned forward, microphone on, and with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, interrupted her mid-sentence. "Ms. Bondi," he said, voice thick with sarcasm, "you've made quite a career on television and political theater. But don't you think you're a little out of your depth here?" The room froze. Even the stenographer paused her typing for a heartbeat. Pam didn't blink. She folded her hands calmly, turned to Graham, and said quietly, "Senator, you might want to check the ethics manual before throwing stones. Especially when your own glass house is already shattered." Gasps spread across the room. CSPN's audio feed spiked. Reporters' thumbs flew across their phone screens. Graham narrowed his eyes. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Bondi leaned forward, pulled a small folder from beneath the table, and slid it toward the committee chair. "This is a sealed DOJ complaint," she said. "And it names you." Panic flickered across Graham's face, just for a moment. Then the shouting began. The gavel slammed down hard. "Order! Order in this chamber," barked Senator Martin Schultz, the committee chair, his voice rising above the uproar. Pam Bondi remained seated, expression composed, hands resting lightly on the table. Across from her, Lindsey Graham's face had gone pale, then red, then somewhere in between. He pointed a trembling finger at her. "This is outrageous. This is a political hit job. You don't get to waltz in here and throw around baseless accusations." But Bondi didn't flinch. "It's not baseless," she said evenly. "The Department of Justice started its preliminary inquiry 2 months ago. You know that, Senator. You were contacted. Twice. Now the air was electric. Cameras zoomed in. Phones buzzed under desks. Even the seasoned aides in the back of the room looked shaken. Senator Graham tried to stand, but stumbled as he rose. His voice cracked. "This is a stunt. I demand that folder be dismissed from the record." But Senator Schultz had already opened it, scanning the first page. His eyes widened slightly before he covered the contents again with a paper. "We will recess for 10 minutes, he announced. "Security, please remain in the room." That was when the murmurs began, one by one, other senators whispering among themselves, several of them clearly agitated. Pam glanced at her watch, then turned to her lawyer seated behind her. "He thought this was political," she murmured, "but this was personal. And legal." Outside the hearing room, a pair of Capitol Police officers began making their way down the hallway, quiet, focused, and very much on alert. Lindsey Graham stood frozen behind his chair as the 2 Capitol Police officers stepped quietly into the hearing room. Their presence didn't go unnoticed. Senator Josh Milburn, seated 2 chairs down, leaned toward Graham with a low warning, "Lindsey, if there's truth to what's in that folder, this is about to get ugly fast." Graham shot him a look, but the color had drained from his face. He gripped the edge of the desk and turned toward Senator Schultz, voice shaking now, not with rage, but something closer to fear. "I demand to speak to my attorney before anything proceeds." Schultz didn't even look up from the folder. "That might be wise," he said coldly. "But that doesn't stop us from acting on a sealed criminal referral." Pam Bondi, still seated at the witness table, watched him quietly. She wasn't smiling. There was no gloating. Just an icy focus, the same kind she'd worn during high-stakes trials. A moment later, Schultz turned to the officers. "Gentlemen, would you please approach the senator?" The sound of heavy boots on marble filled the chamber. Graham backed away instinctively. "You can't do this," he hissed. "This is political persecution. This is insanity." One officer stepped beside him, placing a calm but firm hand on his shoulder. "Sir, you're not under arrest yet. But we need you to come with us, now." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters raised their phones. Cameras zoomed in. And as Graham was quietly but unmistakably escorted away, his eyes locked on Pam Bondi. Fury and disbelief burned behind them. But she didn't look away. She simply turned her microphone back on and said, "Now, shall we continue the hearing?" As the double doors closed behind Lindsey Graham and the two officers, the entire chamber sat in stunned silence. For a full 10 seconds, no one moved. Then Senator Dianne Levinson, a senior Democrat, leaned forward and broke the quiet. "Madam Bondi, what exactly is the nature of these allegations?" Pam Bondi's fingers tapped once on the table. Then she leaned into the mic. "Financial misconduct. Misuse of campaign funds. Improper lobbying, coordination with private defense contractors. All supported by internal emails, bank transfers, and, most notably, several whistleblower testimonies from his former staff." More murmurs, louder this time. Aides darted in and out of the side doors like bees from a broken hive. Senator Schultz turned to her. "And the Department of Justice gave you this material directly?" "They did," Bondi replied, "under an emergency protocol, once new corroborating evidence surfaced. My testimony today was pre-cleared for public release, except for the sealed portion you just reviewed." That was when Senator Maxwell Carr, a longtime Graham ally, slammed his fist on the table. "This is a setup. You've been gunning for Graham for years. What gives you the right to act like a federal prosecutor?" Pam stood slowly, towering with the weight of momentum. "I'm not acting like a prosecutor, Senator. I'm doing what you should have done months ago, telling the truth. And if protecting corruption is your version of loyalty, then maybe you're not sitting in the right chair either." The entire room fell silent again, now charged with tension. Carr sat back, visibly shaken. Outside, a wave of reporters had already gathered in the marble corridor, shouting questions at every official who stepped out. And somewhere deep within the Capitol, Lindsey Graham was being led into a secure room, with no cameras, no speeches, and no control over what came next. As the hearing resumed, Senator Schultz cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Bondi, the committee is now in possession of sealed evidence. But for the public record, are you prepared to explain your connection to this investigation?" Pam nodded. "I was contacted in April by a former aide of Senator Graham's. He was terrified, said he'd seen wire transfers coming in from defense contractors right before Graham made key votes on foreign aid and weapons contracts. At first, I didn't believe it. But then he showed me the emails." The room was silent. The public gallery had filled again. Word of Graham's dramatic exit had gone viral within minutes. Even senators who had left during the chaos had returned, some with staff whispering in their ears, others checking phones under the table. Pam continued, "After verifying the documents, I took them to DOJ contacts. Within 3 weeks, the complaint was opened, and investigators uncovered a paper trail stretching back over 5 years." Senator Carr interrupted again, but this time with less fire. "Why now? Why release it here, today?" Pam didn't hesitate. "Because I was subpoenaed. I didn't ask to testify. But once I sat down in this chair and Senator Graham tried to discredit me, on live television, I made a choice. I wasn't going to let him twist the narrative." Then, calmly and with a lawyer's precision, she opened a separate folder. This second binder contained summaries of related transactions involving 2 additional senators. I recommend you read it carefully. Audible gasps erupted again, this time louder. Carr's eyes flicked nervously to the binder. Schultz looked stunned. "Ms. Bondi, are you saying this goes beyond Senator Graham?" "Yes," she replied. "And what I'm saying is, this committee has a lot more cleaning up to do than it thinks." The chamber was no longer just tense, it was teetering. Senator Schultz held the second binder like it might burn him. He opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the top pages while the room watched in silence. His brow furrowed. Then he looked up. "Senators Lawrence and Boudreaux," he said flatly. "Your names are in here." The room erupted. Senator Boudreaux, mid-sip from his water glass, froze. Lawrence, a younger rising star from the West Coast, stood up instantly. "This is a smear job," Lawrence shouted. "You're out of line, Pam." But Pam Bondi didn't even turn her head. "Those documents are traced and timestamped. Wire transfers, offshore account routing, influence tracking. I didn't write the story. I'm just delivering it." Senator Carr stood again, this time not to object, but to walk out, face tight with dread. Others murmured to their aides or stared at their phones. At the back of the room, one camera operator whispered, "This just turned into the biggest political scandal in a decade." Outside, the media frenzy had exploded. News crawlers were already spinning, Graham escorted out of hearing in handcuffs, bomb threat 2 Senate corruption widens. Senator Schultz closed the folder and looked out across the committee. "We are officially suspending all non-essential business until an emergency review of these documents is complete. This committee will now enter executive session." But as people began to stand and collect their things, Pam Bondi remained seated, staring straight ahead. Senator Levinson approached quietly. "Pam, why now? Really?" Pam turned to her with the cold truth. "Because we don't have time to pretend anymore. The rot isn't at the edges, it's at the core. And it's either exposed now, or it swallows everything." Behind closed doors, the Senate Oversight Committee's executive session looked more like a war room than a hearing. No cameras. No press. Just 12 senators, 3 federal investigators, and Pam Bondi, seated at the head of the long mahogany table with a stack of classified binders in front of her. Senator Schultz rubbed his temples, voice low and deliberate. "These documents implicate 3 sitting senators, including Graham. If what you've presented is accurate, this committee is sitting on a live grenade." One of the investigators, a stern-faced DOJ liaison named Clark, stepped forward. The DOJ was preparing to unseal these findings in 2 weeks. Ms. Bondi's testimony accelerated the process. Senator Boudreaux stood. "I want to see the original files." "I've never," Clark cut him off. "You'll have your chance. But make no mistake, your name's on 2 account logs and a phone call transcript with a now indicted defense executive. We're not interested in denials. We're interested in cooperation." Pam remained quiet, watching the unraveling. Senator Lawrence's hands trembled as he turned a page in his copy of the file. This is career-ending," he muttered. "Worse." Pam finally spoke. "It's not just your careers at stake. If those defense contracts were manipulated, American lives were put at risk. Our national security was compromised." Schultz slammed his hand down. "Enough. Everyone in this room will remain until federal counsel has reviewed every piece of this material. No calls. No aides. No spin." Suddenly, a loud knock echoed from the other side of the chamber doors. A staffer entered, pale and breathless. "Senator, the FBI is in the building. They want access to the committee floor. Now." No one said a word. Pam just leaned back slowly in her chair and folded her arms. "Let the cleaning begin." Within minutes, the Capitol transformed. FBI agents moved with precision, flashing credentials as they entered the committee wing. Staffers were cleared from hallways, laptops seized, offices locked down. The rot that had festered quietly for years was finally being dragged into the light. In the private chamber, the atmosphere turned suffocating. Senator Boudreaux was pacing like a caged animal. Lawrence sat slumped in his chair, sweat soaking through his collar. Even Schultz looked like he'd aged a decade in an hour. DOJ liaison Clark opened a sealed envelope and placed it on the table. The Attorney General has approved preliminary detentions. Depending on each senator's level of cooperation, charges will be pursued accordingly. Boudreaux exploded. You're arresting sitting members of the United States Senate? You'll burn this institution to the ground. Pam Bondi didn't flinch. She leaned forward. You already did that. I'm just pulling back the curtain. Agents entered the room silently. Two moved toward Boudreaux and Lawrence. One walked straight past them, and stopped behind Senator Carr, who had tried to quietly return to the session through a side door. Senator Carr, the agent said, you're being placed under federal detainment for questioning regarding offshore bribery and obstruction of justice. Carr blinked in disbelief. Obstruction? I haven't even spoken. Pam raised an eyebrow. Actually, you tried to. Earlier. On a hot mic. We heard it all. Lawrence sank further into his seat. Schultz stood up with a shaky breath. This committee is now in recess, until further notice. Pam gathered her files, her face unreadable. But as she stepped past the senators, some furious, some shattered, some silent, she paused at the door. This wasn't personal, she said. This was overdue. Then she walked out. And behind her, the halls of Congress echoed with the sound of power being dismantled. The story exploded across every screen in America. News anchors interrupted programming mid-sentence. Headlines blared, senators detained in shock ethics raid, Bondi at center of unprecedented cleanup, crowds gathered outside the Capitol by sunset. Some protested, others cheered. But everyone, left, right, and center, was watching. Inside her quiet office 2 blocks from the Hill, Pam Bondi sat alone, flipping through the final DOJ summary that had just arrived via secure courier. She hadn't spoken to the press. She hadn't issued a statement. She didn't have to. Her name was already on every major network, and her image had become symbolic, bold, unmoved, decisive. The woman who walked into the lion's den and pulled the teeth out one by one. There was a knock on her door. Her chief of staff stepped in, looking tense. Pam, the White House just called. Twice. Pam set the folder down. Did they say what they want? They didn't say. But I think they're feeling the pressure. She nodded. Of course they were. Behind the scenes, Beltway insiders were scrambling. Super PACs were quietly scrubbing donations. Lobbying firms were issuing emergency press releases distancing themselves from Graham, Carr, and Boudreaux. The establishment had been shaken, and it wasn't over yet. Pam stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the crowds gathered along Constitution Avenue. This isn't just about corruption, she said quietly. It's about consequences. Her staffer hesitated. Do we go public? Speak out. Pam turned back, calm as ever. Not yet. Let the truth speak for itself a little longer. Outside, sirens echoed in the distance. Not in panic, but in motion. Federal motion. And for the first time in years, Capitol Hill was no longer in control of its own silence. Inside a high-security briefing room beneath the Capitol, a group of senior lawmakers, legal counsel, and federal investigators gathered in hushed tones. The president's legal advisor had been flown in. The Chief Justice had been informed. What had started as a single confrontation had turned into a government-wide audit in real time. The Speaker of the House, usually a commanding presence, sat with hands clasped tightly together. How far does this go? She asked quietly. The lead investigator, a stern woman in her 50s named Agent Meeks, replied without emotion. So far, 12 elected officials across both chambers are being examined. Several staffers are cooperating in exchange for immunity. What a mess. Bondi uncovered wasn't the disease, it was the symptom. A deep silence fell over the room. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi received a message. Simple. Direct. From a federal number. We need you at the DOJ. Tonight. No explanation. No preamble. She didn't need one. She closed her file, left her office, and entered the waiting black SUV with tinted windows and government plates. As the vehicle pulled into the Department of Justice garage, agents nodded silently and ushered her into a private elevator. Upstairs, in a secure meeting room, the Attorney General was waiting. He stood as she entered. Pam. Take a seat. What you've done has changed the landscape. It wasn't about change, she replied. It was about accountability. He gave a slow nod. We've reviewed everything. There will be indictments. There will also be retaliation. Pam didn't blink. Let them come. The AG slid a folder across the table. We want to offer you a formal role. A lead prosecutor in a special federal task force. Independent. Protected. And very public. She looked down at the folder. Her name was typed across the top. Pamela Bondi, Special Counsel, Operation Integrity. Pam stared at the folder. Her name, printed in bold on the DOJ letterhead, felt like both a target and a torch. You realize, she said slowly, this makes me the enemy of half this city. Maybe more. The Attorney General gave a faint smile. Half of them already see you that way. The difference now is, you'll have the badge to match. She opened the folder and scanned the proposal. The task force wasn't just symbolic. It was real, jurisdictional authority, investigative independence, a team of forensic accountants, federal prosecutors, and protection detail. This wasn't a cleanup job. It was a war room. How many people know about this? She asked. As of now. Just the president, myself, and 2 federal judges. We've kept it airtight. Pam exhaled. They'll come after me. The smear campaigns, the threats, the full machine. They already started, the AG said flatly. We've intercepted chatter. Someone's already trying to leak a false narrative about your testimony being politically motivated. Pam pushed the folder back for a moment. And Lindsey Graham? In federal holding. He's lawyered up. But one of his former aides has just flipped. She allowed a quiet moment to pass. If I do this, I don't want ceremonial. I want access. Total. The AG nodded. You'll have it. But once this starts, there's no off-ramp. No stepping back. You'll be front and center. Pam reached for the pen resting beside the folder. She clicked it open and signed her name. Then let's finish what we started. As she stood, the AG offered his hand. Good luck, Special Counsel Bondi. Outside the DOJ building, a second black SUV was already waiting, flanked by unmarked vehicles, a subtle but clear message: the rules had changed. And this time, accountability had a name. 3 weeks later, America was no longer watching from the sidelines. They were glued to every broadcast, every headline, every leaked deposition. The Bondi task force had gone live, and within 72 hours, subpoenas began dropping like dominoes. Senator Graham's legal team tried to spin the arrest as partisan theater, but that collapsed when his own former aide released voice recordings tying him to the illegal contractor funneling scheme. Senators Boudreaux and Lawrence were both indicted. Carr pled guilty in exchange for reduced sentencing. But it wasn't just them. Behind the scenes, corporate executives, dark money operatives, and 2 former cabinet officials were swept up in what was now known across media outlets as the Integrity Storm. And leading every press conference, every court filing, every tactical move, was Pam Bondi. At her first public briefing as special counsel, she stood at the podium, calm and unflinching, in front of a backdrop that read, Office of Federal Ethics Prosecution, Special Task Force. Dozens of microphones pointed at her. Reporters shouted over one another. Ms. Bondi, was Lindsey Graham the target all along? Are you planning to investigate members of the current administration? How far will this go? Pam raised a hand, and silence fell instantly. This isn't about party. It's not about vengeance. It's about restoring public trust, something that's been quietly stolen in backrooms, boardrooms, and committee chambers. No one is above the law. Not anymore. The room erupted with questions again, but she stepped back from the podium, said nothing more, and exited with her team. By that evening, her name trended #1 worldwide. And across the nation, something had shifted. Not just politically, but culturally. The idea that real consequences could reach those who once seemed untouchable was no longer a fantasy. Pam Bondi didn't set out to change the system. She just refused to let it keep breaking everyone else. And in doing so, she lit a fuse that couldn't be put out.